Good afternoon, and welcome to Supporting Loved Ones with Significant Needs During These Challenging Times. Today's presentation is being offered through the Community Living Education Project, also known as CLEP, in collaboration with Behavior Therapy Associates. My name is Melanie McGacken. I, along with Colleen McKay-Wharton, will be your host for today's webinar. This afternoon's presenter is Dr. Michael Selps. Dr. Selps is the Executive Director of Behavior Therapy Associates. He is a licensed psychologist in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, certified school psychologist, and board-certified behavior analyst at the doctorate level. Dr. Selps also serves as a co-executive director of the High Steps Summer Social Skills Program and has extensive experience evaluating and treating preschool-aged children through adults. Dr. Selp has an extensive bio, which we will attach in the chat section of your screen. Today's session will allow an opportunity for questions and answers throughout the presentation. We encourage you to submit your questions using the Q&A feature on your screen. For your convenience, we will also attach a link to today's PowerPoint in the chat section. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Michael Selps. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much, Melanie. It's really an honor and pleasure to be able to speak to everyone and to have you join us for this afternoon's webinar entitled Supporting Loved Ones with Significant Needs During These Challenging Times. I understand that we have a number of educators, mental health professionals, could be in private practitioners or in the public domain, and a number of family members and caretakers. So we welcome everybody, and I hope that you find this afternoon to be educational and helpful in the valuable work that you do. My intention is to get through all of the slides that we have, and everybody should have a copy of the PowerPoint as well. We're going to take some natural pauses in between several sections of the PowerPoint, and I'll also make sure that we have some time at the end for some Q&A. So as Melanie had mentioned, please use the Q&A as an opportunity to share your questions, and Melanie will moderate that and will either interrupt me, or when we have our breaks, then she'll share some of the questions we have, and I'll do my best to answer that. You also see my contact information. My email is usually the best way to reach out. So if you have some questions or comments or any concerns, you can certainly do that following the webinar or even during, and I'll do my best to follow up with you in the coming days and respond to your questions. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda. Unpredictable times. So while we're, I guess, about 4 months or so into this pandemic, at least from the United States, we know that there continues to be a great deal of unpredictability. We're going to take a little bit of time and talk about what are the continuing challenges and anticipated challenges over the next several months for our learners. And when we're talking about learners and individuals, we're talking about anywhere from preschool age all the way through adults. So you might have joined our webinar because you have a loved one who's in your home, or perhaps another family member. Could be a friend or a neighbor. It could be because you're serving as an educator in some capacity and you have somebody who's on your caseload or in your classroom. It could be that you're an employer, or perhaps a job coach, or working in a community mental health center or some other kind of employment setting where you're supporting somebody in the community. So whatever the area may be in which you find that you're working with, supporting, caring for someone that has special education needs, significant needs, hopefully you find that you've come to the right place. So we'll be talking a little bit about those unpredictable times and how that impacts not only you, but the individual for whom you're providing care. We'll be talking about also some of the behavioral challenges, the social, emotional, behavioral challenges that go along with the continued challenges associated with the pandemic. And that'll be a good natural shift to talk about some of the anxiety and stressors that individuals experience. Again, not just individuals with special needs, but also those who are providing the care and support for them. And we'll provide some strategies that would be really critical for your own self-care and also the individual's self-care. And again, we'll take some questions as we go through this. So let's think a little bit about some of the questions and thoughts that you might have been having over the last number of months that may still be present now and not necessarily getting any better. So we'll go through some of these and just see whether you can kind of check the box on this and with some variation. I'm worried that my friends, family members, neighbors, coworkers, or I will get sick. I know in speaking with many educators and private practitioners, deciding whether to go back to an office, or educators waiting to find out what the plan is with their school, community-based workers trying to figure out what that might look like, or in your own professions, if you're here as a family member thinking the same. What about it's been so difficult being at home and working remotely for so long? Sort of, I don't know what that new normal is like or what the next new normal will be like. Is it really safe to actually go into work, to go into schools, into the community? Others are telling me we need to do this, we need to do that no matter what. Is it safe? Is that going to be okay for me and others? How can I best support my child, my client, my student in a school, in work, in the community? How do I go about doing that? How can I juggle all of this? So how can I kind of have those plates spinning? How can I get everything on that plate and manage that in a way that's productive and effective and keeps my sanity? How do I do that? What about for the individuals? What about for individuals that have significant needs? So as I go through some of these questions and thoughts, I think what you'll find in some ways, their thoughts and their questions, if they could come up with them or if they share them with you, in many ways are very similar. I don't even understand coronavirus and social distancing, right? I mean, it seems that every day or every week we're finding out new information, finding out that something we learned before wasn't necessarily true, or questions we had before, now we're getting answers to those, or there's more new questions. So what does it really mean? Is it 6 feet? Is it 3 feet? Is it 8 feet? What kind of masks do we use? I'm worried that my friends, my family members, neighbors, coworkers, or I will get sick. I work with some college-age students as well as young adults, older adults, school-age children, and they will share their concern. Hey, I'm not concerned about myself, but what about if I bring something back and I'm living with a parent or a grandparent, or I go visit someone, might they get sick? Will I be able to handle wearing a mask for several hours in a row? So we know that our individuals experiencing significant needs are asking those questions. What is that like? Because maybe they haven't worn a mask at all, or maybe they've only worn a mask for 5 minutes popping into a store with a parent or another family member. When will I see my friends again? And what will that look like? It's been so difficult being at home and working remotely for so long, just like our caretakers are saying and thinking. Is it really safe to go into work, into schools, into the community? And how can I juggle all of this and remain calm? So again, there's a lot of similarity that exists in terms of those concerns, a lot of uncertainty. And when we think about that uncertainty, trying to have some certainty is really what we want to achieve. That lack of control, that lack of ability to be able to know what to predict, how will I handle this? Will I be safe? Is it okay to do? Will I be successful? That breeds a lot of that increased stressors, further triggering potential anxiety, which we'll talk about. So what are some of those unique needs, particularly for individuals that are a bit more vulnerable because they have more significant needs? What are those unique needs associated with the pandemic? Well, certainly socializing is difficult. I'm sure yourselves, like myself, have experienced having a lot less time with our friends and family members over the last several months. Not those that are in our home, but certainly neighbors and seeing friends and seeing extended family members is really difficult. And I have a pretty good understanding of all the factors that are contributing to that. But for an individual who has developmental delays or has emotional difficulties and or other kinds of experiences that they're struggling with, they may not completely comprehend what does that really mean and why am I unable to see some of my good friends and my teachers and my employer or my colleagues. And that prolonged separation from significant others that they otherwise were socializing with can cause some additional emotional distress. We know that we're seeing increased mental health issues for individuals that we would describe as neurotypical that don't have the significant delays and difficulties. But if we think about the population that we're focused on today, they have an increased risk at towards some of these mental health issues because they not only experiencing those difficulties, but have a lot more difficulty processing and comprehending some of the rules and expectations and don't have a good sense about when and how things will change. Gosh, it's tough for us, right? Let alone an individual who's struggling with these difficulties. Social distancing. So again, kind of challenging to understand and comply. And what does that even mean without getting into too many details? We talk about social distancing, but we see videos and photos of individuals that aren't keeping that distance. So what does that concept really mean? Is it an arm's length? Is it a hula hoops kind of length? Is it just where the marker is? When and how can I be close to a colleague, another student, a family member, a teacher? So that's something that's going to require continued education. And I would strongly recommend a lot of modeling, video modeling, visual modeling, so that the individual can benefit from seeing what does social distancing actually look like, almost as if we would have a poster board or some video showing, here's what it looks like, and here's what it shouldn't look like, just like we would prepare someone for proper dress, proper hygiene, proper transitioning behavior. We need to be able to demonstrate and break down and model and practice what appropriate social distancing is, because that's a real challenge for many of our individuals. What about wearing masks, right? So again, I'm sure many of you, like myself, went through a transition of, well, all right, nobody needs masks. So, okay, I guess it would be a good idea to wear a mask. And then it went to, well, we need to wear a mask. That's the best thing to do. So for a number of individuals who are continuing to either work remotely through school or through some employment position, or adults who are involved in an adult day program, they may be continuing with remote learning continuing at this point and have had very limited exposure or opportunity to wearing masks. Not wearing a mask and then moving to wearing a mask can create some challenges, whether it's in terms of breathing, whether it's in terms of picking up on facial expression, right? So I'm speaking and you can see kind of how I'm emoting. So when I can see you and we're in a situation, I can pick up on facial expression and body language. What we know about many individuals that have delays and other kinds of difficulties is they struggle to pick up on some of those social cues. Tony Atwood, who's prolific in the field of Asperger's syndrome, autism spectrum disorder, and what he would say is, if you ask an individual to look at somebody's face, they'd say, why do I need to look at your face? All I'm going to see are your eyes, your ears, your nose, and your mouth. That many individuals who have developmental delays don't pick up on body language, but they try, and they try to pick up on the emotional expression. It is something they can learn. However, if we're cutting off half of the face and they can only see a portion of it because of the mask, they're missing a lot of those cues where otherwise they already are struggling because they don't pick up on tone of voice and volume, and they don't understand some of the idioms and metaphors and analogies and other kinds of expression in our language. So covering the face, that makes it even more challenging for them. Their ability to gain perspective of a situation is more difficult also. What can we do to promote some of this social interaction and social language? Well, this is not novel. This is something that we've always wanted to focus on and need to focus on, is helping individuals to be able to communicate, kind of that functional communication. So particularly more important with social distancing, with processing language and communication and expression, is to give these individuals the tools to be able to comment, to ask questions, conversation starters. You want to kind of the wheels, moving within the brain, having them think about, if I just make a comment like, hey, I went somewhere really cool this weekend. Yeah, there's kind of that silence there, right? So we want to be able to promote that and prompt some of that communication by having, again, those wheels turning and the light going off, where the individual says, where did you go? What did you do? Who did you go with? And then even commenting of, oh, that's cool. I went there too. That must be awesome. And then coming back to some questions. What did you eat? Well, my favorite food is this. So while we may not be able to physically be as close to one another, communication and language becomes increasingly more important. Therefore, we have to be mindful of the skills that we're teaching, whether it's in a work setting, community-based setting, or in a school setting. And that's so critical because we want to help individuals to be able to use language as a way to seek help, to communicate that there's a problem that they're experiencing. Maybe they need a break, right? They've been wearing a mask now for 3 hours, 6 hours, 45 minutes, whatever their threshold is. Do they have the ability and or the willingness to communicate, I need help, I need a break, or to ask a question? So therefore, continuing to focus on that social language and meaningful reciprocal communication. What can we do with mask wearing and social distancing, as I kind of hinted at before? Well, we can model that and practice that. What does that mean? So if you're engaged in any kind of remote learning right now during extended school year programming, if you're preparing your own child or a young adult or at any age to return to an employment setting or community-based setting or an adult day program, we can use this valuable time now, yes, while we're doing remote learning or any time where you might have some interaction face-to-face in person with that individual. We can practice mask wearing. We can practice from the social distance, an appropriate distance, both of us wearing a mask. And we can look to see, can I pick up on your facial expression? How am I feeling? So I'm going to describe something that was I'm really happy and excited about. Can you guess at what I'm feeling? Could I show you my facial expression without using words? Can you guess at how I'm feeling? Now, I'm going to guess how you're feeling because I want you to maybe exaggerate a little bit more with your emotion. I've noticed that just even going into some stores when somebody's greeting. Can I really pick up on the facial expression? You're just kind of getting the upper part of the cheekbone and maybe some of the eyebrows and the eyes, but of course you can't see their mouth and you can't get all of what's going on. So modeling that, discussing that, having some good practice is really important. Again, video modeling is a wonderful tool. Video modeling would be where you could be videotaping yourself. You could be videotaping the individual, obviously with permission, and have an opportunity to review that. We can also prime the individual. Priming means preparing them prior to the situation so that they know what to expect and show them what appropriate mask wearing looks like, what appropriate social distancing looks like, so that they're more inclined to be able to do that appropriately in that situation. We sort of take out the mystique that exists. So if you can relate to that, the first time that you went into a grocery store or a department store or a smaller store and you were wearing a mask or got together with some friends, distancing but wearing a mask. And if that felt a bit, strange for you, imagine an individual who doesn't truly understand all of those concepts and has a degree of anxiety about that. On top of that, some of the discomfort of wearing masks, right? Some masks are more comfortable than others. Some you can breathe better in than others. And the confidence that we can instill in our individuals that we're working with is not about encouraging them. It's really about the experience. They need repeated experiences of mask wearing, of social distancing, so that they can become increasingly more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then that becomes more of the normality for them and they're successful. We could also do what's called a social story or a social narrative of writing a little story that describes, for example, my name is Johnny and I'm 16 years old. I know that it's important for me to wear a mask and keep my distance of 6 feet from other people. Sometimes that's hard to do, yet I know it's really important for me to be safe and other people to be safe. I'll do my best to wear my mask and keep 6 feet distance, and therefore we'll be safe and happy. So that's just kind of off the cuff, a quick social story or social narrative that we might create with someone and could even have some visuals that would support them. How else can we manage working through this and understanding the continued uncertainties that exist? Well, we need to keep people active, right? We've had many individuals that have been primarily much less active, either because they didn't have a phys ed class, because they weren't going outside for various reasons. Maybe they weren't engaging in any sustained exercise. So to keep the mind and body fresh and healthy, it's important to engage in regular exercise. Yes, this overlaps a lot with how to deal with anxiety and self-care, but I wanted to put it in here as well because it is critical for when we think about the continued unpredictable nature of events. We don't know what it's going to be like when is there a phys ed class in school? Are there planned breaks and movement activities for an adult? Will they advocate for that themselves? So we want to make sure that we can incorporate movement, physical activity, whether we're doing continued remote learning, remote working, or if we're in person, just really necessary for our well-being. What about planning for the routine? So practice and good practice is going to translate to much better success. So if we can have a plan, and that means in whatever role you may have, again, as an educator, as a parent, in an employment setting, if we can prepare the individual for what's going to be coming the next day or the morning, for what's going to be coming the rest of the day, we're much more likely to get ahead of the behavior and to prep that individual for greater success. So what are the expectations? Let's get the book bag ready. Let's get your work bag ready. Let's get your phone fully charged. Where is your watch? Where is your schedule or your calendar? Where are your materials? So we can't and shouldn't do it all for them, but we can prompt them to be thinking about, what do you need for today? What are the materials that you need to have? Where should they be? Well, right by the door or right by the table where you're going to be working. If we're continuing to work from home, or if we're going to be going out somewhere, well, either way, let's get that routine in our head and the planning for changing out of our pajamas into our school clothes, into our work clothes. Yes, I recognize that it's so much easier and more comfy to sit in our pajamas all day. But really, there's that mindset change that moves from, I've changed from my pajamas to now I'm ready for work, I'm ready for school. And that can go a long way to help the individual to transition much more smoothly. Having breakfast in the morning, thinking about holding off with some of those preferred, highly preferred activities that are difficult for them to move away from. First, we're going to do what we need to do. Then we're going to engage in the activity that we need to do that is more preferred. So first, we're going to be doing our work. First, we're going to be doing our school. Then we're going to have sort of our more highly preferred or fun time thereafter. And also pairing that with good visuals. So a visual schedule of photos, it could be words, textual cues, we call that, using a clock. So again, we're more likely to have success if we can prepare the individual with what the routine looks like, with visual supports, and get their mindset in the gear and in that mode of moving from whatever my relaxation state was overnight to transitioning to school and to work. The last thing I would say about this section is having a good planning conference. So whether that's you're in the home or you're not, let's connect with that individual about, what's tomorrow going to look like? What is this week going to look like? Let's maintain some good communication about that so we know what to expect. Change is inevitable. We're all experiencing that. What we want to try to not have as a variable is how the individual deals with that. And if they can know what to expect and what's coming, they're much more likely to have experience with that. So be very explicit with what those needs are. Let me just pause for a moment and see if we might have any questions or comments that we want to attend to.
Michael, thank you so much. And we have a lot of positive comments coming in so far. One of the questions that has been asked is, do you have any strategies or suggestions if someone has grown so used to their new routine of having to stay in, of quarantining, that they're now afraid to actually go out into the community? Any strategies or suggestions that you can offer?
Sure. So one of the things that we should look at with any change is gradual transition. So if you think about traumatic, significant events that any of you may have experienced, whether it's an accident, like an auto accident, for example, or maybe you've had a really bad meeting that you participated in, particular anxiety about something, to jump right back into the deep end of the pool is not only scary, but is usually not the best solution. So some gradual and systematic exposure and gradually transitioning from that quarantine state to outside. I know some families in my consultation work that have, up until maybe a couple of weeks ago, literally had not left the house at all, concerned that even just walking out of the house gave them a high likelihood that they were going to, contract coronavirus, even if there's nobody around, just walking out in the air. So you can imagine the degree of anxiety not only the parents have, but the individual. So my advice would be that we work to gradually shape that. And that may be that we're going to exit the house with a mask and we're going to walk to the mailbox or the end of the driveway. And then we're going to, walk another 50 feet or another 10 feet. Then maybe we're going to get in the car and we're just going to sit in the car, obviously outside the garage, with the engine on, the air conditioning on, and we're gonna drive to the end of the street and back. And then maybe we're going to drive 5 minutes. And maybe if it's a school age student, we're gonna drive to the school with nobody there and get out. So whatever the steps, the rungs of that ladder would be, gradually moving to where we want to go. We want to have some systematic plan to gradually work through that. What you could also add to that is asking the individual to rate their degree of stress or discomfort, and we would want to gradually see the level of discomfort go down before we move to the next step. So I would encourage you to use the next 6 weeks or so as a way to gradually shape that.
Wonderful. I think that that's going to be really relevant information. A lot of residential programs, individuals who live there still are not out in the community, unfortunately. So I think this is going to be really useful information. And also, can you offer some suggestions of how often do you think these routines should be reviewed?
Another good question. So usually my answer is, with most things, you can't practice too often. So there's a slide I'll have a little bit later called Situations in a Hat, where we talk about practicing some challenging situations. You can put take some Post-it notes and fold them up and put them in a hat, put them in a container, pull out and read the situation. So we think of it the same way. If you're playing soccer, if you're playing a musical instrument, if you're learning a particular academic subject area or doing a daily living skill, the need for practice is so important. A lot of individuals, professionals in the field talk about 10,000 times. I'm sure that's not a novel concept, that the idea is that we need to do something 10,000 times to become a master of that. The Beatles, Bruce Springsteen, they didn't just come out of the womb and were amazing musicians. They had to practice and practice and practice literally thousands of times before it became that muscle memory. So the idea of the routine, of the planning, the practice, whether social distancing, masks, or anything else that would be relevant as we're talking today, I would really stress you can't do it too often. So if you're not doing it anytime, then maybe right now we look at, we're going to do it 3 times a week. Maybe we're doing twice during the week and once on the weekend. If you're doing the practice with someone in your home, do it prior to something that's highly preferred. Maybe we're doing it just before dinner or after dinner, before dessert, or before a family movie night. So that would be my recommendation. Okay. How about if I move on to the next section, and then if we missed some questions, Mel, we can certainly pick up on those toward the end. So what contributes to challenging behavior? So I want to talk a little bit about this. I certainly am not going to have the time to get into the details of all of what you see on the screen here, but I just wanted to be able to comment that there are a lot of factors that contribute to challenging behavior. And again, to get into all of the details and understanding function, or the reason for behaviors, and all the different functions, all the different manifestations of behavior, would probably be a full day webinar. So maybe another time. But to comment, at least we can say that a lot of difficulties with challenging behavior relate to deficits in self-regulation, regulating and managing emotions, having developmental delays, so not having a good awareness of the social situation, being able to process that cognitively and with language, and being able to communicate about that. Impulse control problems can also play into that. Experiencing anxiety and trauma. And we know that unfortunately many individuals know someone that has passed, that has passed away as a result of coronavirus, or just has died due to other reasons, or other significant stressors like loss of employment or other financial woes that people are experiencing, or family discord we know has increased in many families as a result of the pandemic. So there can be a lot of factors that can contribute to challenging behavior. In fact, something like oppositional and defiant behavior is not a neurologically based disorder. We see that there are a countless number of factors to contribute to that, which could result in turn some challenging behavior in a school setting, in a work setting, in an adult day program setting. So the individual may be experiencing that frustration. They may not feel as connected. Certainly, they haven't been in a program perhaps since February or since March. So feeling disconnected and feeling that they are sort of not having that emotional connection where they had before, can contribute to some challenging behavior, because when you're not feeling comfortable, you're wanting to move away from that. I added this log. It's called Learning My Feelings log, which you're more than welcome to use. And this is a way of just kind of processing, asking some questions to the individual, like, what happened? Where were you? How did you handle yourself? Who were you with? What were you feeling? It also gives us kind of a level of intensity of emotion. So were you feeling strong? Were they weak? Were they medium? So going from a 1 to 10. That's also really important with emotion. So is it a little problem with a big feeling, or is it a big feeling with or a big situation with a big feeling? So sometimes we see that individuals don't connect the degree of their response to the situation. So breaking my pencil should not really result in a feeling score of a 10, that I'm super strong, angry, and frustrated. It should probably be like a 1 or a 2. But who am I to tell someone how they're going to feel? If they have a strong reaction, we need to be able to help them to process and understand how they were feeling, how they responded, how did they handle themselves, did they do it well or not, what are some alternatives? And as you see at the bottom there, it says role play with the individuals. So we want to role play, we want to practice. Hey, let's try a redo. Let's do a do-over. Let's take that situation where you threw the remote at your brother, or you threw the materials and ripped them in the workplace, or you refused to do the work and you turned your chair over, or you dropped to the floor. Let's review that. Let's practice what we should do instead so that we have a better outcome to that. Being able to regulate and manage those emotions, can allow us ultimately to have better self-control. It helps us to be able to participate more fully in activities that are meaningful, not just to us, but for the individual that we're working with. And to be able to sort of make those choices, one of the things that we want to continually try to help individuals move toward, and hopefully all of you listening can appreciate this, is that we want to kind of expand the window of time, the space that exists between a situation and our response. So if you think for a moment about driving, and if you're driving and you're stuck in a lot of traffic and now somebody is honking the horn at you, or somebody just cuts you off while driving. So you might say, well, I honked my horn, or I screamed, or I cursed, or I did whatever because they did that. Well, it's not exactly that, because not everybody has a negative, inappropriate reaction to some stressful situation. There's something that's in between there, between the situation and our response. What's in between there is our thoughts, our ability to make a choice, to size up the situation and decide, how do I want to be with that? Am I willing to sit with that emotion and regulate and manage and to experience, hey, I'm pretty frustrated here. My mind is telling me I want to hit him, I want to scream at her, I want to do whatever, yet I need to maintain some control here. That's harder, of course, for individuals that have significant needs. How do we get there? We've got to practice. We've got to use some video modeling. We've got to demonstrate what it looks like differently. We've got to dedicate that time so they can experience over and over and over and over again until we get that muscle memory, seemingly, just like dribbling a basketball and not having to look every movement. It becomes more natural. So hopefully for you, as for me, it's become pretty natural over the years that I don't quickly react to every situation. Sometimes I might react quicker than I'd want, but for the individuals we're working with, we want them to have some more space, some more time between stressful situation and their response so that they have more success with their self-control. They have difficulties in all these areas as well. Controlling that impulse, being able to follow directions, arguing or getting withdrawn. So the more we can get ahead of those behaviors, the more likely we are to be successful, because in the thick of it, in that moment, it's kind of hard to calm them down. What can we do though? We can absolutely have some stress, some emphasis on social emotional learning. That is specifically teaching individuals the skills that are important for conveying their emotions, for keeping their body calm. So we can help them to be able to identify and communicate feeling words, not just good, bad, but I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling frustrated, I feel embarrassed, I feel scared, worried, lonely. So if we can add to their feelings identification, their feelings vocabulary, we're going to give them greater tools so they can let us know what they're experiencing. An individual communicating that they're frustrated in the workplace goes a long way. In fact, there's a lot of support in the literature that indicates that it's not the vocational skills, it's not the academic skills that predict success for an adult who's going into an employment opportunity. It's those soft skills that we would describe as emotional regulation and social skills. So being able to be in a workplace and refraining from spitting on someone or grabbing what they have just because you want to eat their French fries. That's not going to, keep you employed there if you're grabbing their French fries. You have to be able to notice that feeling, stay calm, manage that emotion. So what we can also do is we can check in with the individual when they arrive to school, when they arrive to the workplace, when they arrive to the day program, when they arrive in your home, when they're leaving your home. So how are you feeling? What about when their feelings change? Let's use feeling words again. Now I'm feeling frustrated because, now I'm feeling calm because. Well, what can I do when my feelings are changing? What are my options? Some other critical skills, and when I say critical skills, these are skills per the conversation before, is we've got to dedicate time to work on these because they inevitably are going to become critical if they haven't already. Learning to wait. For many of us, that can be frustrating, right? But we pick up our phone and that's what we're going to do while we're waiting, or maybe we talk to someone. Even harder if we're social distancing, even harder if we're uncomfortable wearing a mask. But having to wait is a skill that we can practice. Accepting no, that's a tough one, right? That's one of the first words that the children learn is no, because they're hearing that from the adult who's saying, no, you can't have that. Not just not now, but no. Accepting help and asking for help. So knowing when there's a problem, I need help, and asking for that assistance. And then also seeking attention appropriately. So not grabbing, not pulling, not screaming, not yelling or hitting, but to tap if that's reasonable, or to say, excuse me, or raising our hand, some way to gain that attention appropriately and safely. And then also asking for missing items in whatever setting we are, asking for needed items. So if we can target the emotional regulation, building up those feeling words and communicating those feelings, but also working on some of these essential skills that I've listed at the bottom for functional communication, we're going to go a long way with helping to minimize potential challenging behavior. In other words, if we improve communication and improve some of these core skills, we're going to have fewer behaviors on the other side. Here are a couple of visuals. We might have a way of checking in with how the individual is feeling. Here's a feelings thermometer that a child made and could use as a way to monitor how his emotions are throughout the day, and what can I do if I'm having trouble with staying calm or getting calm. But the other connected piece is that many individuals struggle with the idea that I can figuratively and literally sit with the emotion that's negative while being calm, meaning I can feel frustrated and keep my body calm and safe. Versus for many individuals, what they notice is, I've got this uncomfortable feeling. I'm frustrated, I'm anxious, I'm scared, and I need to what? I need to explode. I need to express that because I can't, meaning really, I'm not willing to sit with this uncomfortable emotion. And instead of being willing to sit with this uncomfortable emotion, I'm going to blow up on you, right? So we need to help individuals, it comes back to that practice again, right? To help them kind of notice that experience of discomfort. We would say becoming more comfortable with the uncomfortable. Notice I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling scared, and I'm keeping my body calm and safe. It's an incredibly challenging skill for typical developing individuals, let alone those who have difficulty. But we can practice that, and we should be practicing that by setting aside time to do some role play scenarios, pressing the pause button in a situation so we can review the situation. Just like if you're a coach at a soccer practice, you blow the whistle and stop and say, wait, you're here, you should have been over here. Let's have you move over here and let's blow the whistle and let's restart that play. So if we can do that in a real life situation, we can give the individual the tools and the power to be able to modulate their behavior, stay calm, even though they're feeling uncomfortable. Sometimes having a place like a safe haven, a calm area they can go to look and read a book, or for an individual, depending upon their age or developmental level, to squeeze a stuffed animal or to color it or draw. That may just help them, some visual cues to give them some prompts about how they can manage their emotions. I mentioned video modeling. So if we were in a large group and I was able to see all of your faces, I would say, how many of you have done video modeling before? And usually what I find is there are very few hands that are raised. But if I said to you, how many of you have ever gone onto YouTube and learned how to do something like how to fix an appliance, how to fix your iPhone, how to cook something? Most people would raise their hand. Yeah, I've used YouTube for that. And I've used it for dozens and dozens of reasons. That's basically video modeling. We watch a video, someone demonstrating the desired skill, and then we repeat that. And we can go back and we can check. So whether it's real life, somebody showing the skill, I'm going to demonstrate it, model it, or video modeling has tremendous research value to that in generating, promoting desired skills. I mentioned situations in a hat previously. I basically was trying to convey that we can put challenging situations on a piece of paper, pop them in a hat, we can pull one out, we can read it, and we can practice it. Everybody in the family could have their own hat or container. In the workplace, each person could have their own container if we're working with individuals that have difficulties. In the classroom, same thing. We could have multiple hats or we could have one hat. The key here is, again, setting aside time to practice challenging situations so the individual becomes more adept and more having greater experience and exposure to some of those challenging situations. What else can we do? We can reduce excessive screen time. Why is that important? Because we know that the research indicates that having that greater level of stimulation can make it harder for the individual to turn off, to get sufficient sleep and rest, and to be able to calm their body and their mind down so they can sleep and to get up the next day with appropriate energy and focus. It's a tough thing though, right? Because we're doing a lot of remote learning. We've got this webinar remotely and we're all kind of looking at the screen, but we just want to be kind of mindful of minimizing that for ourselves and the individuals we're working with an hour before bedtime and minimizing how much screen time they're on throughout the day and even role playing, transitioning from screen time to other activities. Before we get into anxiety as the last kind of phrase, or I should say phase of the webinar, we just pause again and see if there are any pertinent questions regarding this last section, Melanie.
Michael, we have actually a couple of questions coming in. One of them is asking specifically, how do we make people more comfortable and safe feeling as they're going back into day programs, right? I would think it's probably similar to building someone back into their school program. Can you offer any more suggestions of how maybe video modeling could work in this situation? Any other techniques that you could think of?
Sure. So the idea of safety, I think, has a lot to do with confidence. And I think if we really are honest with ourselves and each other, there are very few things that we could say in life are absolutely safe, whether it's being on a plane, whether it's walking, across the street, whether it's going for a run, whether it's being in a car or being in our own home, that we know that unfortunately there are tragedies that occur even when we think that generally the environment is pretty safe. Well, now we add to that the health and medical risks that are associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, and that creates some increased concerns. What I do think is important is certainly the educational piece of informing the individual returning to that day program. I think that was the question more specifically of what to expect. And I know working with many educators and parents right now, that there's a lot of uncertainty, for example, over these next 2 weeks until school districts have submitted their plans for what it's going to look like returning to school in September. Well, I think it's really important, likewise, for these day programs to be able to communicate to families and to the individual, what can we expect when we return to a day program? Where are we entering? How are we going to be dropped off to school? When are we wearing masks? Are we wearing masks? Under what conditions can we remove the mask? What if I have trouble breathing? So basically what we often are finding is that there are more questions than answers right now. And what we need to do is to identify as many of those answers as we can. Perhaps, Melanie, to your point within the question is maybe incorporating some video modeling where we could have a video of an adult who is going through that transitioning from quote unquote the house on a bus or a van to the school while wearing a mask, or to the day program while wearing a mask, getting out of the vehicle, going into the day program, meeting, greeting someone, and going through what that routine would be. So the more we can expose them to seeing what that looks like and demonstrating that through the video, the more likely that individual is going to have success. And then we could actually, even remotely, we can practice that, meaning we could set up even in your house a pretend situation. Let's pretend that it's time to get on the bus, on the van. We're sitting there, we're reading a book, or we're looking at our iPad. So the more we can simulate that, that's also going to make that transition a little bit easier.
And if we can get to one more question, if you have time prior to moving on. We have someone, I believe, from a school system asking, many of the students in their school are extremely limited in communication skills and have a great deal of cognitive challenges. Have you adapted any of these strategies and interventions for those working with people on that side of the spectrum?
Another great question. So as we are working with individuals, so the answer is yes, but as we're working with individuals that have greater cognitive delays, greater language delays, what we need to be mindful of is decreasing the amount of language that we're using, verbal language, and increasing the number of visual supports, and in many cases, perhaps, some physical prompting. And that could be gestural prompting. It could be hand over hand, obviously being mindful about, health concerns that we want to have. So when working with individuals that have cognitive and or language delays, we probably would want to incorporate some more social stories that have visuals connected with that. We would want to, with any kind of calendar or schedule for the day, it's not enough to just have the name of the activity. We probably need to have photos of the activity and perhaps a photo of the analog or digital clock that corresponds to what the time would be, whether it's a preschool age individual or all the way up through adult. So a greater emphasis on visual supports and a much greater emphasis on practice. So for some individuals that may not necessarily need 10,000 times, but instead of sort of getting it after 5 or 6 times, they might need 50 times. So I'd be building it a much more ample, meaningful practice together with more visual supports and more video modeling.
Michael, lastly, would you suggest for day programs, for volunteer opportunities, for schools, for the support professionals to actually come up with some of these materials to send home and share with caregivers? I know that you were talking about practicing in the beginning for us to better prepare someone before they actually get back into that environment.
Yes, absolutely. I've been encouraging on both sides, families to share that with educators and with day program staff, and on the flip side, day program staff and educators to work collaboratively with parents and find out what materials they need. I mean, fortunately, there are a lot of materials that are available for free through the internet, just Googling images or but let's not reinvent the wheel. So if there are materials that a speech language pathologist or a job coach or an educator has at their disposal, and they can share a copy of that with the family, that would be awesome. I think that's a great way to intervene. Okay, let me move on to the last section and do our best to get through this, and then to allow for a couple more questions. My anxieties have anxiety. So why did I start off with that? Because it's not even necessarily just that the situation makes someone feel uncomfortable, but it's the anticipation, or I should say, and it's often the anticipation of the discomfort that can make us even more anxious. So thinking about this topic as we're talking about it today, right? Imagining what is it going to be like for myself or my significant individual that I'm caring for to return or continue in this environment that we're talking about. I'm concerned, what does that look like? I have all these questions like we started off in the beginning, and my anxieties have anxieties and I sort of can't get out of it. So that becomes increasingly more stressful. When we have that discomfort or stress, we often have physical sensations that can go along with that. So we might have headaches and tension, pain, fatigue, even heart disease. We might experience more mental health issues. We might have anger and depression. We might have trauma and increased difficulties with attention and focus and concentration. For some individuals, there might be an increase in overeating or sleep disturbance, or some individuals maybe even substance use, right? So I alluded to this interaction before, the thought, feeling, action, or thought, feeling, behavior, that a situation occurs and our perspective, to that situation is really critical. What are our thoughts and feelings as they interrelate to the situation? And then we respond. We respond not just because of the situation, but how our thoughts and feelings are connected with that. And that can really sort of trigger our response, which could be to escape and avoid because we're really, really anxious and concerned. I want to move away from that, right? Like a tall building or a roller coaster or something that public speaking or having a meeting that's really significant. When we feel uncomfortable, we often want to move away. So when we notice it and are thinking about that stressor, it's easier to keep doing what we're doing, which is to stay away from that situation. So unfortunately, that's not ultimately the best thing, is to remove ourselves from it. Yes, short term, it gives us some good relief. So not going on that plane because I'm afraid of flying gives me some short-term relief. But what am I missing out on? I'm missing out on the opportunity to travel and to explore more and to see people and see places. So avoiding situations that are uncomfortable, whether it's going to school or the workplace, short term, they're easier, but it really doesn't allow us to experience what is important to us. So some tips on self-care, and this would be relevant not just for the individuals we're working with, but all of us who are participating in this webinar. Being mindful first about our stress, maybe compassion fatigue, just like a fuel gauge, that our level goes down. So we're giving so much of ourselves to others, we may not necessarily realize that we've kind of had this, what we call compassion fatigue, that we've given so much to others that we don't have enough left. And therefore we're sort of no good use to someone else. So we've got to step back and care for ourselves. And we also have to help the individual that we're supporting to care for themselves as well. And that means to be aware of and mindful of when I'm sort of hitting that wall, right? So when you hit that wall, you just want to drop, you're done. You have nothing less left to give. But if we can pull back and not ever hit that wall where we collapse, we're here and we can pull back, we're here and we can pull back. So making sure that you build in that time for yourself and that the individual you're working with builds in that time for themselves so they don't hit that wall. This is where this is all connected. And they're not able to regulate their emotions. They're not able to be ready for success for that particular work day or that school day. So whether it's connecting with a friend, a significant other, whether it's physically being able to have time, whether it's just being able to chill, listening to music or taking a warm bath or a shower, engaging in some exercise like some yoga and some movement, getting good sleep. So all of this is really critical for self-care. What I would encourage you to do, those participating in this webinar, as well as the individuals that you're supporting, is to help them to have a plan, right? If we don't have a plan, that's a big first step there. We're unlikely to do it. If we have a plan, at least we're moving in the right direction. Then we, of course, have to follow through. So let's have a plan for physical involvement, for exercise. I'm going to exercise on the treadmill every day, 6 o'clock a.m. So plan for it with a targeted specific time, put it in your device. Here's when I'm going to do it. I'm scheduling it just like an appointment, just like I'm showing up for this webinar at 12 o'clock. I'm showing up for my physical activity. Socially, I'm going to have a virtual breakfast with my friend, with my classmate, with my colleague, with my family member. Let's schedule that and put that into our book, put that into our calendar. Emotionally, I'm going to write a reflective journal. So for an individual that has developmental delays, maybe they're going to draw a picture. Maybe they can give us a couple words about what I really liked today, what I didn't like today, what I hope to do differently tomorrow. How could I change that? So that could also be the self-care plan for the individual that has special education needs, is that we could provide some of those supports emotionally through a journal. But let's plan for that and make sure it happens at a specific time. In the workplace or professionally, when am I going to connect with a colleague? Maybe I need some consultation. When am I going to check with my employer? Maybe I need to get some of that feedback. So again, setting aside that time and committing to it like it's nobody's business, because you know how important that is. Keeping a thought journal or a diary to be able to monitor what your thoughts and feelings are throughout the week can also be really, really helpful. So we're never wanting to ignore our thoughts and feelings. We have to be mindful not to reject the reality. That is, if you or the individual you're working with is concerned about COVID-19, concerned about returning to the workplace, a day program in school, let's not try to convince them that there's no reason to be worried, like by saying, oh, you shouldn't be worried, you shouldn't be scared. Let's acknowledge they're having those thoughts, they're having those feelings, and how can we help to answer the questions that they have? How can we help them to be ready for that transition so they know what to expect, so they can practice that? You know, when you get an airplane, right, and they say you're going to take the oxygen, you're going to put it on yourself first and then your child. It's kind of the same way with self-care. That taking care of myself doesn't mean me first, it means me too. So I'm not so concerned about who it is first, but if you don't take care of yourself, you're going to have a harder time taking care of the individual that you're caring for and you're supporting. So that self-care is critical for everybody that's involved, and to be mindful of that. So what might get in the way, whether for the individual with significant needs or yourself? So when you decide, I'm putting it in my phone, I'm putting it in my planner, here's how I'm going to care for myself, here's how I'm going to take time out for myself. You've got to look at that as that's a critical appointment, like it's the appointment with my cardiologist, like it was this webinar, I'm showing up for it. If you say yes to anything else and to anybody else, you've essentially now said no to yourself. So you planned to set aside time for your self-care, but now you're going to reject that because something else has come along. No, unless it's an absolute emergency. And in that case, then you're going to reschedule yourself, your appointment. Otherwise, you need to keep that time. You deserve it for your well-being. So even when you notice something else shows up, you're going to stick to that. You're going to be mindful of that. You're going to do your best to ensure that you keep your self-care because it's that important. Even when you notice things are challenging, we can incorporate that. So we can replace, as we say, but with and. This is going to be a really tough day, and I'm going to do my best in the workplace. This is going to be a really difficult week, or returning to September is going to be a really difficult transition, and I'm going to do my best to keep things together, to stay calm, and to work with that. Sometimes even working with a therapist may be helpful for the individual's significant needs, or yourself. So that depends upon the degree of challenge. I want to end with this quick activity, and then we'll take a couple more questions as much as we have time. So certainly collaboration, as Helen Keller says, right? Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. So I want to end with this activity. What is one thing that you can do after leaving this webinar that you think will make a meaningful difference, either yourself or those you work with in the house, in the workplace, in the educational environment? What do you think that you can do? So write this down. Put this in your smart device. So what is one thing that you can do and that you will do after this workshop? After you write that down, after you type it, when will you do this? Kind of close on yourself. That is, schedule that yourself. Put it in your phone right now. Put in your calendar specific time and day and that event. Schedule that and commit to that like nothing else, and don't let anything else get in the way. As you're continuing with that or finishing that activity, let me see, Mel, if we have a couple more questions.
Michael, we do. We have a couple more that came in. We have someone sharing that they have noticed regression from a lack of normal and social activities. And they've noticed an increase in reluctancy to communicate and anger within the individual that they support. Any suggestions that you can make?
So without knowing much more, it sounds like one of the things we're talking about, I'm just going to show some different slides as I'm responding here, that you're seeing some regression, maybe because of the social distancing and the quarantining, that the individual is not as inclined to communicate their thoughts and feelings, maybe even not as likely to engage in problem solving or to share what they're emoting. I think we're always more likely to gain communication from someone when we can align with them, when they feel that they are safe and they're not going to be judged. It's quite frankly one of the biggest factors in successful therapy. It's not even so much how much does the therapist know, but what's the rapport like? What is the therapeutic alliance like? So what I would encourage you, whether it's a parent who's asking that or someone who's working with an individual with significant needs, see if we can kind of rejoin that relationship, acknowledging some emotion if we can, seeing if we can rejoin some rapport building, which may mean playing a game or some activity. Oftentimes getting an individual to communicate their feelings or what the problem is when they're not ready is something that's pretty scary. I think many adults, we do that too, right? How are you doing today? Oh, I'm doing great, because we don't want to divulge that. So I recognize it may be missing a lot of the other facts associated with this individual, but I would encourage you to try to forge or re-establish that rapport, that pairing of that relationship with the individual, and that gradually, hopefully, we can see some of the communication come out of that again.
Wonderful. And we're going to end on one more question if we can.
Sure.
And I think
I'll scroll back to the first slide too as we do that.
Wonderful. It's a question of all questions for this webinar. The question is asking, my son keeps asking, when will COVID be over? How can I explain an answer that is appropriate?
So, I guess I'll say politely for the webinar here. I think generally as a rule, we should try not to lie to kids, right? If you're asking me, when is it going to be over? Gosh, I don't know, right? The medical experts, they don't know when it's going to be over. I would do like I'm doing here, and I don't mean any disrespect in responding or trying to oversimplify it, is that it's a really good question, right? And I think that's what we can say to the child. That's a really good, or the adult, that's a really good question. And also what's behind that. So I'm wondering why you're asking that. Well, because as many of my clients say, I'm scared about this. I'm worried about this. I don't like this. So what I'm really hearing you say is you're wanting this to end. You're wishing you knew when this was going to end. Me too. I don't like it. I don't want this to continue. I wish I knew when it would end. It's tough, isn't it, when we don't know when this is going to end? Hey, I'm here for you, and I can continue to have you ask me questions and concerns, but I don't know when it's going to end. But what I do know, this is where, when there's uncertainty, let's have some certainty. What I do know is that we're going to do our best to keep you safe. We're going to do our best to give you whatever information that we have, and we're going to do our best to answer any questions that you have. That's, I think, sort of the best that we can offer. And that's what we can offer to the adults who are not experiencing significant issues, as well as for those that have brought you to this webinar this afternoon.
Perfect. Michael, as always, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us. On behalf of the Community Living Education Project and Behavior Therapy Associates, we thank everyone for joining us today. As you prepare to sign off of this webinar, please know that a brief survey is going to pop up on your screen. Just a few questions, help us help you. Please answer that survey so we can better guide our webinars around your specific needs. Michael, thank you again. Please have a great day, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, and be safe and be well. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well. Take care.